So we start now. I think you are able to, see my presentation. So today, what we are going to cover is public issues. The companies, they want to raise capital in the from the market. So they have various options. They can, raise money through debt. That means take, issue bonds, debentures, non-convertible debentures, issues shares, and issue rights issues, bonus issues, IPOs, FPOs. So we are going to cover all that process, and we are going to understand the law, governing these issues in India. Okay, so let's start with that. So first slide I'm just skipping. I'll come back to this later on. So classification of issues. Now, a company can issue shares in form of, give it to the public, or it can give it to its existing shareholders, which is called the rights issue, or can even issue shares to a certain people. Okay, instead of issuing to the entire public, it can even offer shares to few selected individuals. Okay, so that's called the preferential issue, and we will understand more about all these issues going forward. So now public issues can be of two types, IPO or an FPO. So IPO is initial public offering, and then it can be a further public offering. So the first time when a company issues shares, when it get listed on the stock exchange by offering their shares to the public, it's called an IPO. Okay, and so that means any new company or an existing company which has not issued shares to the public and get itself registered, listed, so it can offer this through an IPO. Then anytime further, if company needs more money, it's already listed on the stock exchange, so it can go for a FPO. That means it needs more money, it can offer shares to the public again. Now, IPO can be either a fresh issue or can be offer for sale. Similarly, an FPO can be a fresh issue or offer for sale. Do you understand what is fresh issue and offer for sale? Anyone? Zubain, are you there? Or anyone who knows about what is offer for sale? No idea? Okay. So, for the first time when the shares are issued, it can be for, it can be fresh issue. That means company requires money. Okay, so issues new shares to the public. So entire money will come to the company for, covering their.
Can I answer the speaker?
Haji?
Can I answer for FPO?
Yeah. Who is speaking?
This is George, sir.
Joy, tell me.
George, sir. George.
Joy.
Yeah, so FPO is basically after the initial public offering, if shares are issued after that, they call it further public.
Okay.
Existing shares.
Okay. Good. So, the fresh issue where, company is issuing new shares, okay, and they will collect money from the public, and that will be, spent for the expanding the company, or for, paying its, past loans. If the company has taken loan, so it can even repay the debt and convert everything into equity. Or it can be offer for sale, which means, any shareholder who wants to offload or dilute his shareholding, he can, offer his shares to the public. Okay. So, even startups do that. There are existing shareholders who want to, exit from the company, or, want to dilute their shareholdings. So they can offer their own shares. Even like, government companies like IRCTC, when they came up with or LIC, when they came up with an issue. So, till then it was 100% owned by Government of India. So, which means, government was offering their own shares, which they were holding. So it was not a fresh issue. So where, entire money was pocketed by the government. So that money was not available to IRCTC for expanding their business, but it was basically bringing public into and becoming the shareholders of that company. So it is called offer for sale. Okay. Now, who are the people who are the regulators of public issues? Who regulate in India? So the first one is the SEBI, the Security and Exchange Board of India. So they have made laws, and we are going to understand that particular law. So we are going to discuss that in great detail in our coming lecture. Then there is something called Companies Act, which also has its own regulations, so which are applicable to the companies who are raising money from public. Then the stock exchanges, the National Stock Exchange and Bombay Stock Exchange, because each time when the company, for the first time when the company issues shares, they get listed on the stock exchange, either on National Stock Exchange or Bombay Stock Exchange or both of them. So there are certain regulations which the company needs to follow. So there is a complete set of regulation. So we are going to understand that also. Then the Reserve Bank of India. So these are the regulators of public issues. Okay. So we are going to cover about, what they do, basically how they regulate in our coming slides. Okay, so what are the key regulations now? We must understand, we have understood what are the bodies, the SEBI or the RBI or the national stock exchanges. So these are the, institutions which, are regulating the issues. But what are those regulations? How they have been framed. So we are going to understand. So key regulations which cover or prescribe requirements in relation to preparation of financial information are the SEBI, the issue and capital and issue of capital and disclosure requirements 2018, which are called ICDR regulations or SEBI ICDR regulations. So these are very important, and we are going to spend most of the time understanding what are these regulations. Okay. If you have any questions, you can always ask me. Fine. So, then of course there are SEBI listing obligations and disclosure requirements called LODR. The first one is ICDR. The second one is called the listing obligations and disclosure requirements. In short, it is called LODR 2015. Of course, they get amended from time to time. Okay, so these are the listing regulations. Then the Companies Act, basically. So there are a lot of regulations which are there under the Companies Act, which the companies need to comply with. So SEBI issues, now we are going to understand the SEBI issues and capital and disclosure requirement regulations 2018. In the morning, I have shared these regulations through a Google Drive. So I've shared a link, okay, so which contains, all the material. So you can just, have a look on that. So first we are going to cover the ICDR in detail, okay. Now, the ICDR, 2018, I'll just show you what these regulations are. The bare regulations, I'm going to, put it on a screen very shortly. So first it talks about types of issues, and we know that it can be IPO or an FPO or a right issues, okay. So then, what are the eligibility requirements of an IPO? So we are going to, cover these. So this is, what we are going to cover in detail. I just put those boxes. So the eligibility requirements of an IPO. Then, of course, there are eligibility requirements of an FPO. Okay, so eligibility requirement when the first time the company is issuing shares and it gets listed in the process, so that the shares get traded on the stock exchange. So that process is called an IPO. So what are the eligibility requirements? And the second, we are going to cover eligibility requirements of a further public offerings. Then additional requirements for offer for sale. So whenever an existing shareholder, either a startup company or a company, the promoters want to offload, or a very big shareholder wants to offload his shares through a process, then there are certain additional requirements for such offer for sale. Then issue of warrants. When the company issues shares, it can issue warrants. Generally they are attached to the certain documents, and they give rights to the existing shareholders that they can convert those warrants into shares at a later date. The price is fixed at the time of issue of warrants, and there is certain amount of money, maybe 10%, 20%, that will be taken by the company at that time, but then they will get converted into shares after, say, 1 year or 1.5 years or 18 months, and then the share price is actually decided at the time when the issue price. For example, Reliance, which is currently trading at say 2,300, if they issue warrants, so they can give warrants to the shareholders, and they can fix a price of say either 1,500 or 1,800 below than the market price which is prevailing now, or can be very close to the market price. And they can say that these warrants will be convertible into shares after a certain period of time. Okay. Then filing of offer document. So all the companies which intend to raise money, either through an IPO or an FPO, they have to make an offer document. Now ultimately it's called prospectus or a red herring prospectus. So initially they make a offer document. Okay, so we're going to talk about what is a prospectus and a red herring prospectus later on. Then draft offer document to public. This offer document is actually, which is in the draft stage, it is shared with the public through a website or through an advertisement in the newspapers, so that company can invite any comments from the public before they go ahead and issue shares. Then, a very important regulation is regarding ASPA, which is, application supported by a block amount. Originally, when we were applying for shares to the company, whenever there was an IPO or an FPO, we were giving a check to the company. And company, because sometimes the issue will be oversubscribed and we may not get any shares, or we may get shares. So we may get some refunds later on, and the company may send checks back to the people. So all that process was very cumbersome. So, new system which was introduced quite a long back, maybe around 2015 or thereabout, was called application supported by block amount. So, which means that instead of giving a check, you give a mandate to your bank that, suppose you have a balance there. So, give a mandate that, certain amount can be, blocked for this issue. So, if you get shares, so they will take the money from your bank account at the time when the shares are allotted to you. So whole process was simplified, and it was called ASPA. So we'll understand more in detail of the ASPA. But of course, now it has been overtaken by UPI. Okay, and ASPA and UPI both are parallelly being implemented by companies for a certain section of people. So for all the retail investors, it has become now UPI. But for all institutional investors, or maybe for anchor investors or large investors, ASPA is still in vogue. Then all the companies have to pay a security deposit to the stock exchange, because stock exchange is helping the companies to raise money. so some amount of security deposit has to be given. Usually it is around 1% of the issue size, so that company becomes serious about a whole process of the issue which they are bringing into the public. So they collect a security deposit which is refunded as soon as the share issue becomes fully complete. So we are going to talk about, so this is just a beginning. I'm just giving a brief overview about the regulations. Then the opening of the issue, when it get open. So when the draft offer becomes a public offer document, when the SEBI has given the approval, so they can open the issue. So we're going to understand when a company can open the issue after they get the nod from the SEBI. Then underwriting. When the company is issuing shares, they have to get the shares underwritten by the lead managers or the merchant bankers. Okay, so they are merchant bankers, which are also called the lead managers, who help the company for the process of bringing the issues in the public. For so they act as underwriters. Okay, so it is mandatory for all the companies to get their shares underwritten. Okay, so that it gives confidence to the public that in case if the shares are not fully subscribed, then the merchant bankers, the shares will devolve on the merchant bankers, so they have to take the balance shares. So it gives a kind of a confidence to the public who are applying for the shares, when they find that the shares are underwritten by the merchant bankers. So in case there is a failure, and company is not able to collect money from the public because of the lukewarm response, either because share was highly priced, so the underwriters chip in and they bring money, and they will subscribe to the shares to the extent which is not taken by the public. Then there is a minimum subscription. Okay, for example, there is a share issue of say 100 crores, so at least 90% of the money should be collected. Okay, then only the company can go ahead with the listing. Okay, so we are going to talk about all this. So it's just a beginning. I'm not talking about all. I mean, for each section we are going to cover everything in detail. Then, sometimes, or I mean, most of the time, there is an oversubscription. Suppose the company needs 1,000 crores, company has got 5,000 crores. So it's called a oversubscription. So then what happens? Whether the company can retain the money? No, the company cannot retain the money. Company has to refund the oversubscribed portion. Of course, they are allowed to hold around 1% for certain kind of issues. They can hold some money, but we'll understand what that 1% they can hold will be applied for. So it's called over subscription. Then there is a monitoring agency. Okay, so whenever a company is issuing shares, they have to appoint a monitoring agency who will monitor the public issue. They will, company has collected, for example, 2,000 crore rupees. So they are going to basically see whether the company has spent that money, entire money, for the purpose which they have, given in the prospectus or the offer document. Now, generally, the credit rating agencies which are there in India, like ICRA or other companies, CARE. So these are, they are acting as a role of monitoring agencies. Earlier, the banks and financial institutions, they were playing the role of a monitoring agency, but with the recent amendment, all the credit rating agencies, they act as a monitoring agency. So this gives a complete, free, confidence to the prospective shareholders or the people who have, or the shareholders who have applied and got the shares of the company, that whatever company has taken money, it has used for that purpose. Okay, so monitoring agency is going to submit a quarterly report and give it to the stock exchange as well as to the SEBI. We are going to understand more in detail later on. Then allotment procedure and basis, how the shares are going to be allotted to the retail investors, to the the big investors, anchor investors, as well as to the the qualified institutional players. So we're going to talk about whole process. What is the process which has been laid down by SEBI? Then allotment, refund, and interest. In case if the company is not able to garner, 90% or not able to collect the money, or if they have collected and there is there is a extra money which they have collected, so they have to give the refund along with the interest if they don't do it within the stipulated time given by the SEBI. Then release of subscription money. Once the money comes uh, into the bank account with the process of when the public applies for the shares or when all the investors they give money to the company, it is put in an escrow account. So the money cannot be used by the company till the merchant bankers they give a go ahead that they have company has complied with all the regulations and it has fulfilled all the requirements. Then only the money can go into the bank account where the company can spend the money for the purpose for which the issue has been made. So release of some money, so we're going to talk about that. Price and price band. Company can allot a price, at what price they are going to issue the shares, or they can even give a price band. Now, who decides the price and the price band? Basically, it is decided by the company with the help of the merchant bankers. Okay, so they always, engage the merchant bankers to help them to find out what should be the price of an issue. Okay, and sometimes, it can be either a fixed price or it can be a price band. So, we'll understand in what circumstances company has to come with a price band. So they can say between 100 rupees to 120, the investors can, raise their bids. They can apply for the shares. Okay, so we are going to understand the whole process. So all this process, the merchant bankers are basically, helping the companies or overseeing the whole process. Then the promoter's contribution. So, the company is, owned by certain people who are called the promoters, who may, have a majority shares of the company or a certain amount of shares of the company. So they are called the promoters. So they need to also contribute, for any time the company is raising money in a process of an IPO or an FPO. So we are going to understand, and there is a full SEBI regulations regarding the promoters' contribution, and there can be certain lock-in period. So they can't sell the shares, and they have to retain these shares for a certain period of time. Minimum offer to public and a reservation. Okay, so we are going to talk about, this thing. So we could talk about the minimum offer to public and reservation. There is a various regulations to regard, so which I am going to discuss as we cover this topic. then allocation in net offer, then exit opportunity. Allocation in net offer also I'm going to discuss when the time comes. Exit opportunity to dissenting shareholders. Now, if they can be, the shareholders, if they want to exit because, they feel that, the share money, the money which they have, they have given to the company and company is not used for the purpose for which was specified in the prospectus. So within a certain period of time, they raise a voice, and there is a procedure for that. So money can be given to the dissenting shareholders if they want to exit. Then we're going to talk about the rights issue. Whenever a company issues shares after the IPO has done and the company wants to raise money further, so the existing shareholders, they have the right. For the first right, whenever a company wants to need further money, so money has to be taken from the existing shareholders. So as per the Companies Act, earlier under the 1956, it was called Section 81. I don't remember the new section, but there is a new section which is somewhere around 100. So the existing shareholders have the right. First right, whenever the company is raising, whenever a company needs fresh money. So if the existing shareholders feel that they don't want to give the money to the company, so then company can go for a FPO or a preferential issue. Okay, so preferential issue is when the money is raised to a few select people. Okay, then there's something called qualified institutional placement, where the money is raised through a certain qualified institutional buyers, which I'm going to discuss more in detail later on through my presentation. And then there is a SME exchange. Okay, it is called the small and medium exchange. The small companies, when they want to raise money, they can raise the money through a SME exchange. When the large companies, they want to raise money, it's called the main board. So I'm going to talk about the main board and the SME exchange in my coming slide. Okay. Then the listing pursuant to IBO at IGB. So this also I'm going to cover later on. Okay. So I'm just going to cover leave this aside because there are a lot of things which we will be understand when we are going to. So first of all, we are going to cover basically the applicability of the regulation. So actually, all these boxes which I skipped, they will be coming in my coming slides in detail. So I'll cover them as soon as I reach to these areas. Okay. Applicability of regulations. So who is going to read this slide for me? Zubain, are you there? Zakaria, are you
Yes,
there?
sir, I'm here.
Zubain, can you read?
Yes, sir. An initial public offer by an unlisted issuer.
Okay, so yeah.
A rights issue by a listed issuer where the
Now,
aggregate value of the issue is 50 crore rupees or more.
okay, so what we are doing is basically we are understanding that these regulation, ICDR regulation 2018, they are applicable to whom? Okay, they are applicable to an IPO by an unlisted issuer. So that means a company which is not listed on the stock exchange, and they want to raise money by way which they get listed. So this regulation is applicable to them. So that means this regulation is applicable to the IPO. Then a company which is issuing rights issue, that means it's offering shares to its existing shareholders. Okay, and now it is only when their aggregate value of the issue is above 50 crores. So if a company wants to raise a capital through rights issues for 5 crores, 10 crores, 15 crores, up to 50 crores, they can do it without following these regulations. So if they're issuing share capital to the existing shareholders by way of right issue, and if it happens that the issue is more than 50 crores, then they have to comply with the SEBI regulations. Further, Zubin?
A further public offer by a listed issuer.
So then, that means it is also applicable to an FPO. Now, it is a listed issuer. So that means the company is already listed on the stock exchange. Now, a company wants to raise further money. So it's called an FPO. So these regulations are applicable to them also. Zubin?
A preferential issue by a listed issuer.
So whenever a company can also raise money from a very selected few people, okay, instead of going to public or instead, raising money from the existing shareholders, it can even raise money by offering shares to a certain individuals, but provided the company is listed. So it is not that the company can issue shares through preferential issue if it's an unlisted company. Okay, it has to be listed issuer, and then if it's a preferential issue, then they have to comply with the SEBI ICDR regulations. Zubin?
A qualified institutional placement by a listed issuer.
So then, I talked about, there are two kinds of things, a preferential issue, a qualified institutional placement by a listed issue. Okay. So we are going to discuss about what is a qualified institutional placement and a preferential issue in detail as we go along. So again, it has to be, there is a process which they have to follow, the SEBI regulations they have to follow. Okay.
An initial public offer of Indian depository receipts.
Now, there is something called IDRs. Of course, have you heard about GDRs or ADRs, American Depository Receipts and Global Depository Receipts? Have you? Any of you?
No, sir.
Okay, whenever, a company has to raise money, say in whenever for example Reliance needs money and they want to get the money from international investors, okay, and they want to get their shares listed on New York Stock Exchange or any other London Stock Exchange, so they can't do it. Of course, recently there is an just a week back, the company, the India has decided, the SEBI or the government of India is actually opening up a process through which all Indian companies will, be able to list their shares in any exchange in anywhere in the world. Okay, but it is going to take some process. Okay, which has been just, a week back it has been announced. But before that, companies were not able to do that. Reliance was not able to list their shares in New York or Nasdaq or London Stock Exchange or any other company like in India which was not able to do it. So the process was through ADRs, American Depository Receipts, or GDRs. So this is a shortcut mechanism. Instead of issuing shares, then they are keeping those shares with a custodian bank in America, okay, and the custodian bank issues a receipt against those shares, so then those receipts are listed on the national Nasdaq Stock Exchange or the New York Stock Exchange. So they are called ADRs, American Depository Receipts. So I'm going to cover that very soon, since I thought you have already done it, ADRs and GDRs. So it requires a little bit more of explanation, which I'm not giving you right now, but I'll give you. Okay. So similarly, a foreign company, if they want to list their shares in India, like Apple, Microsoft, or Amazon, if they want to shares, are their shares available on India? Are they listed on the stock exchange in India? No. So for them also there is a process, a shortcut mechanism, which is called Indian Depository Receipts. Okay, so instead of listing the shares, they can list the depository receipt. So they can keep their shares in custody with the Indian bank, and they will offer receipts against that, and that will be traded in the stock exchange. So that is called the IDRs. Now, so far, of course, it is almost like I think 10 to 15 years these rules have been framed. There is only one company in the world which has come to India and listed their IDRs. It's called the Standard Chartered Bank. Apart from that, no other company has come and listed their shares through a process of called Indian Depository Receipts. So these regulations are there, but these are seldom being used. Okay, so a right issue of an Indian depository. So again, nobody has done so far. Initial public offer by a small and medium enterprise. Okay, so if a small and medium company, they want to raise the money through an IPO process, so they can also do. And I mean, these companies are also, they have to comply with the regulations. Okay, Zubain, can you read further?
A listing on the innovators growth platform through an issue or without an issue.
Okay, generally, company earlier, this platform was being used by all the startup companies. So there is a separate platform which was being used by startup companies, okay, of the stock exchange to list their shares. Okay, so we are going to discuss about that. So there is hardly any response in this. So, it is now being called Innovators Growth Platform. So we are going to understand what it is and what is happening under this platform later on.
A bonus issue by a listed issuer.
So that means, if the company can also issue bonus shares, the company may have a lot of reserves with them, so they can capitalize the reserves by and converting that reserves into bonus issue. Okay, where the money company doesn't get any money, but the reserves get capitalized. And if I'm having a shares, for example, I was having 10,000 shares of a company called SRF. So company issued 1:4 bonus, and after that I have 50,000 shares of SRF. I never gave any money to the company, but only whatever reserves they are having, they were converted into shares, and I got it. So, earlier the share was trading at, say, 10,000 rupees. After the bonus, the share price went down to 2,000 rupees, but my entire amount remained the same because now I have 50,000 shares. I mean, of 2,000 rupees. Earlier, I was having 10,000 shares of 2,000 rupees. So the amount remains the same. Okay. So bonus is basically, so if a company is issuing bonus issue, so they have to comply with the SEBI regulations. Okay. Okay. So wait, can you read?
Initial public offer on main board.
So, initial IPO on main board. Okay. The stock exchange, National Stock Exchange and the Bombay Stock Exchange, normally we, transact with, or we buy shares of Reliance or Wipros or TCS, any company which is listed on the stock exchange. Normally, it's called the main board. Okay, so let's understand what is main board. So can you read this?
Main board means a recognized stock exchange having nationwide trading terminals other than SME exchange.
So, by this definition, which is given by the SEBI, it means there are two kinds of stock exchanges in India. Other than, of course, National Stock Exchange and Bombay Stock Exchange, there are two divisions of each stock exchange. One is called the main board, and another is called the SME exchange. Okay, so all small companies, small medium enterprises, a separate exchange has been formed for them. Which even normally any person doesn't know that. If you ask, say, 100 people, 99 people will not be aware about that there is something called a SME exchange. So all these, small companies, they can get their shares listed on the SME exchange. Okay, just read next paragraph.
When a privately held company sells shares to the public for the first time and becomes listed on stock exchanges, it is known as a main board IPO. These big corporations have a post-issue paid-up capital requirement of at least 10 crores.
So that means, any company which has a post-issue paid-up capital of 10 crores and above, the main board applies to them. But any company which has a paid up capital of 1 crore, 2 crores, 5 crores, 9 crores, they normally go and get themselves listed on the SME exchange because that these are the very small companies. Okay, fine. So SME exchange, just read this.
SME exchange means a trading platform of a recognized stock exchange having nationwide trading terminals permitted by the board to list the specified securities issued in accordance with Chapter 9 and include the stock exchange granted recognition for this purpose, but does not include the main board.
So this chapter 9 is of the basically of the SEBI regulation, ICDR Regulations 2018. So it says that, if a company is small, having a post issue capital of say 10 crores less, then they have to go to the SME exchange and get their shares listed on that exchange. Okay, fine. So we are going to talk about little bit this, and after say certain period, I'm going to move on to some practical part of it. Okay, so it's 11:46. Okay, so maybe another 15 minutes I'll carry on with this theoretical part, and then we'll move on to the practical part. Okay, so these are the ICDR regulations. Okay, I'll just show you the regulations first of all. So are you able to see the regulations on your screen?
Yes, sir.
So these are the regulations, these are called the Security Exchange Board of Capital Issues 2018, and this has been the latest amended regulation up to 2023. Okay, so it talks about the first is basically preliminary section chapter 1, and then it contains definitions. Okay, so a lot of definitions with regard to regarding advertisements, how they have to give an advertisement for, I mean, getting a IPO or FPO, anchor investor, application as per. So it covers, everything. Okay. So a lot of definitions are there. I'm going to, just run through this. Now, I'm not going to cover these definitions, but end of my slide, the PPT which I'm showing, all the important definitions I've given at the end. We'll visit them when the time comes. So, so it talks about, then it is like this. This is first we'll come to the IPO, okay, straight away. The IPO which I'm talking about, regulation. It's a huge document running into 500 pages, but we are going to cover at least 70-80 pages, which are very important of it. So these are all definitions we are covering. So I'm just okay. Can you see this chapter 2, initial public offer on main board? Is that there? Can you see that?
Yes, sir. It's there.
So actually, we are covering this on our PPT. Public of any IPO offer on main board. First is eligibility. Entity is not eligible to make public offer. Then the eligibility requirements of an IPO. Okay, so all this is there. So I'm just leaving it here. Okay, I'm just coming back to my slide, so you can just go through this. So what regulations are there? Basically, IPO Chapter 2, Regulation number 4 to 55. So this runs from regulation number 4 to 55. So you can just see that it was, regulation 4. So, regulation number 4, 5. Okay. So it right goes right to up to 55 regulations. Okay. Then the regulations for FPO is from 101 to 131. Okay. You don't have to remember the regulations, everything. It is just for, to give you an idea about that. Now, just read it, Zubain.
Entity is not eligible to make an initial public offer. An issuer shall not be eligible to make an initial public offer if the issuer or any if the issuer, any of its promoters, promoter group, or directors or selling shareholders are debarred from accessing the capital market by the board. If any of the promoters or directors of the issuer is a promoter or director of any other company which is debarred from accessing the capital market by the board.
Now, all the promoters or the promoter group or directors, or if, any big shareholders are there, so they are debarred from accessing the capital market by the SEBI. If by for whatever reason they are debarred, so they cannot, these companies are not eligible. For example, Vijay Mallya, he has been debarred by SEBI to issue their shares. They can't. I mean, he can't raise by through any company money from the public. So, if the SEBI has debarred a promoter or a promoter group or a large, shareholder of the company, then those companies will not be eligible to come with a public offer. Similarly, the same people, but of a subsidiary company of or an associate company, they are also debarred. Okay, if any of the promoters or directors or issuer of the promoter or director of any other company. which is debarred from accessing the capital market by the board. So even if they are related to the other company, that company, if suppose there is a director, director X, okay, he is of a company, he is of another, director of company Y. So this director X has been debarred, so he cannot, suppose he happens to be a director of company Y, then he has been debarred. So, but he's also a director of company X. So company X will not be able to issue shares. They will also be debarred. Okay, so that is what is written. Okay, read further.
If the issuer or any of its promoters or directors is a willful defaulter or a fraudulent borrower.
So that means if either directors or promoters, if they have been declared as willful defaulters, they have not paid their loans to the banks, okay, and then be declared by SEBI as a willful defaulter, then those companies will not be able to issue to the shares. Like in case of a Vijay Mallya, where he has defaulted in giving money, paying money to the back to the banks, so they cannot allowed to raise money. Again, next.
If any of its promoters or directors is a fugitive economic offender.
So if a person has been declared as a fugitive economic offender under the relevant act, there is an act which these people, some people can be declared as fugitive economic offenders. There are many cases in India, people who are living abroad, but they have been declared as fugitive economic offenders. So these companies cannot raise money in India through a process of IPO or FPO, whatever. Okay.
An issuer shall not be eligible to make an initial public offer if there are any outstanding convertible securities or any other right which would entitle any person with any option to receive equity shares of the issuer.
So that
Exception
means
revoked.
if a company has certain convertible securities, like debentures, but these debentures can be converted into shares after a certain period. So company needs to first convert those shares, those securities into shares, then only they can go for public. So an issuer shall not be eligible to make an IPO if there is any outstanding convertible securities or any other right which would entitle any person with any option to receive equity shares of the issuers. So which means that if a company has certain instruments which can be converted at a later date into shares, and then that gives a right to some other person that they can convert those securities into shares. So first the company has to complete that process. Okay, they have to issue shares uh, to the issuer who has those rights before proceeding for an IPO. Okay, exception is ESOPs. That means the employee stock ownership plan, where the company has given shares, rights of shares to its employees. So these are only the exception category. Okay. Okay. So is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So what I'm doing now is, since we have done a lot of theory, so I'm going